Hey, friends, I'm glad you could be with me. It's been a while since I've done a tip on one of the new hops varieties. And I had to do one on this variety because this year here in southeast Pennsylvania, in northeast United States, we had a hops plant that we planted last year, didn't do much, but this year we kind of just let it go, almost like a weed with no water whatsoever, and bam! It really grew nice. So it's a variety that's really rare. It's, I don't think, grown at all commercially. There was a few people trying 4 or 5 years ago, but it's got some really interesting oils and smells and aromas. I couldn't find any information, very little information on the internet about it, but what we did was we sent it out to have tested, complete oil alpha beta acid test, and we're going to talk about that shortly. And a lot of things that are on Google aren't true. We're going to find out. So without further ado, folks, Max Raphael here from Hops World and Hops Brazil with tip number 130, NEO-1 hops. Let's do it. Its name being derived from the group of hops found growing mostly wild in the southwest portions of the United States. NEO-1 was bred from a hops plant that's actually a subspecies of hops known as Neo-Mexicanus. The genetic name scientific would be Humulus lupulus neo-mexicanus, as opposed to Humulus lupulus lupulus, which is the European version of hops. Now, this group of hops are native hops plants that evolved about 500,000 years ago in this part of the U.S. It is very much further south than typical regions where hops are grown. Typically, hops are grown further north in temperate regions and in the very north of the United States. These hops are grown down in the southwest portion of the United States, and they've even been found as far south as the country of Mexico. Imagine that. The late Todd Bates is actually the guy that put Neo-Mexicanus hops on the map. In the 1980s, Todd was very much interested in medicinal and herbal remedies, and he often hiked in the high elevation desert areas of New Mexico near where he lived to collect these native herbs and plants. This area is the south part of the Rocky Mountains, and these hops were found at elevations between 8 and 10,000 feet above sea level. And this habitat is extreme. The temperatures can change from day to night between 30 and 50 degrees, and actually in the summer it could be up to 108 degrees, and in the winter minus 20 Fahrenheit. But bam, what a difference. And the lack of regular rainfall at times is another factor that really makes this hops unique. Unlike most hops in the world, Neo-Mexican hops, and specifically our hops variety NEO-1, typically does not like a lot of water. So after collecting a lot of wild hops, Todd started breeding with the most vigorous plants that he could produce to come up with seeds that would eventually, one of them seeds would become this variety NEO-1. And as I stated in my first sentence, NEO-1 is a hops that was bred. Contrary to most publications out there, it is not a native wild hops. Yes, it is 100% Neo-Mexicanus, but NEO-1 is the daughter of another variety, a wild variety that Todd found that he named Amalia. So any publication that says NEO-1 is the sister of Amalia is wrong, and they all say that. NEO-1 is the daughter of Amalia. Prior to Todd's death, I personally spoke to him and we chatted on numerous occasions. I have confirmation verbally and in writing that he created NEO-1 from a seed. NEO-1 is a dual-use hops that can be used for bittering, but its strong lemony citrus flavors and tropical aromas really come through if used at the end of the boil or even in a dry hop. Our second year plant here was not trained at all this year. We just let it grow, kind of wild. I wanted to see what would happen, and we gave it no water whatsoever. As you can see, it grew up on the side of these steps and actually overtook a small rose bush right here with the roses, and it really took off here in the second year. Some interesting things about a NEO-1 and most Neo-Mexican plants. The inner nodes, which is the space between the branches, is very tight and closer than typically most commercial varieties. This lends to a high production of cones. The leaves, if you look at the leaves, they're very deep cut leaves, which is another thing very typical of Neo-Mexican hops. Most of the commercial hops in the world have leaves that are much more fatter and more closed. We'll show you a comparison here. So what that does is actually allows on the Neo-Mexican hops the sunlight to pass through and not burn the leaves as much, so that they can handle the super hot, over 100-degree summer temperatures and sunlight in the region where they're grown. These hops have adapted over 500,000 years to handle these extreme temperatures. Also, the hops leaves don't perspire as much and lose as much water. These hops are very drought resistant, and one of the other varieties that Todd found in nature actually died because there was a drought for 3 years. Did not rain in that region for 3 years. But 3 years later, when it rained, the hops grew back. These hops typically grow from the monsoon rains in the spring, and they last throughout the year without any more water. This really helps in the near desert climates where these hops are found in nature. And another thing is these 3 leaves. As you can see, tons of 3 leaves. Really unique to just this typical variety. If I see one that looks like this with 3 leaves, I always think of NEO-1. Another unique thing about these plants, a lot of the branches are only branching on one side. They're alternate branching, one side, then the other. That's so atypical of hops. Every other kind, 99%, they branch opposite in pairs along the stem. Another thing about this plant, if you look closely, it has some male flowers. And what that means is the plant is a hermaphrodite. And hermaphrodite means when the plant has some male and some female flowers. Some people say that this is caused by stress as it's growing. Some varieties, every year, they produce hermaphrodites on the same variety, so I think it's a genetic thing besides the stress. You can check out some of our prior videos on male versus female plants or hermaphroditism in hops if you want to learn more about these subjects. Another interesting quality of Neo-Mexican hops is a lot of the publications say that this hops, because of its levels of certain oils, is resistant to pests. I can believe it. For one, this plant barely got attacked by any pest. Most of our plants really get attacked bad with Japanese beetles and all here in the United States, and also by caterpillars sometimes. This one, although there is some caterpillar marks, or maybe something else, possibly some kind of bugs that are eating the leaves, it's pretty much a darn healthy plant. as far as any pest. Now, there is another publication from a grower that says that the plant is low resistance to downy mildew and spider mites. So, it's hard for me to tell what's real and what's not real because there's very little published about this plant. I could find nothing anywhere about the whole oil content of NEO-1 other than alpha acids. I found one publication that gave you total oils. So we are going to actually harvest this plant, and we're going to count the harvest and figure out what the yield would be per acre. And we're also going to send it out and get tested, some of these cones, to see what's really inside Neo-Mexican hops. But one interesting thing about this being pest resistant, we had a problem real bad this year here with groundhogs. Groundhogs really devastated some of my plants. And right next door to this plant were two other commercial varieties. That one was European Fuggle, which is from England, and another Galena, which is an American variety. The groundhogs devastated them plants. They actually climbed up the little trellis that's behind the plants and ate all the leaves, all the cones. They climbed up behind this plant on the steps, passed right by this plant, had to step over some of the branches to get to them other two plants. This plant was not touched by groundhogs. Maybe I should put groundhogs in all of my breeding hop yards to decide which plants are most sweet and the groundhogs like. I don't know if that has to do with making hops, but it's kind of interesting. Another thing that's said about these hops is that they need less of a day length because where they're grown, the days are not as long as typical growing areas. So they said that these hops typically flower very early. I've had these hops in Brazil and they have flowered very early. But here this year, this plant is our last plant to flower. I don't know. I'm not sure what happened. I'm showing you real data with real plants. Every one of these videos, I'm standing next to a real plant that I can smell, touch. It's not just what's published. I want to try to give you the real deal on these plants. So this plant is flowering very late. The cones of NEO-1, as you can see, are a lot more light green than some of the other cones out there. They're typically, a lot of them are a little bit elongated and thinner. They're not real big, but there is tons and tons of cones on this plant. I can't wait to actually see the yield of this plant and figure out what the yield would be per acre. They are full of beautiful lemon and citricy smelling lupulin aromas. Are really unique and sensational. I love NEO-1 hops. I should probably make a beer using this hops because this plant is really worth it. Now, published. Every publication I found except one has alpha acids from 7 to 9%. One publication that's selling hops that has their NEO-1 at 11.1%. Beta acids 3 to 3.3% is what's published everywhere. And this other publication that's selling the hops says theirs tested at 4.5%. Flavors, strong lemon, lemon, some citrus, definitely some tropical notes. I'm getting some maybe herbal, flowery notes myself, although I haven't seen that published. Substitutes, I don't know. Lemon drop, which is supposed to be really lemony. Maybe another Neo-Mexicana, but they say Amalia is a lot different, so it's really pretty unique. As far as what beers you can make with this hops, what I've seen published from summer ales up to IPAs, double IPAs, sours, Saison for sure. That's what I would try. I'm not sure how many people have actually made beer from this hops. So production, I've seen zero publication. What production? I did see storage capacity publicized on that one site at 74% alpha acid retained after 6 months at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Spacing would be typically 12 feet by 36 to 42 inches. Definitely, I would consider this on a possible low trellis, 9 to 12 foot in a hedgerow type configuration, because as you can see, this is a hops bush. It's not a hops plant, it's a bush. Stay tuned, because we're going to give you the results of the oil and alpha test. We're going to send out for full complete testing of the variety and see if it's within the parameters what the variety is supposed to have based on this lab that I'm sure has tested NEO-1 in the past. And we'll see what's really inside NEO-1 hops. Well, before I go forward talking about the hops plant, I want to talk a little bit about Todd Bates. I first met Todd probably 4 or 5 years ago when I was looking for some Neo-Mexican hops. And I seen Todd's name, heard Todd's name, looked him up, found him actually on Facebook, read him on Messenger, and he told me it was too late, that he sold his old collection, and he didn't have any. We all owe Todd a big favor, because I'm especially enamored by Neo-Mexican hops. And it was Todd who really put them on the map, who believed in these wild native hops and even bred them when no one else believed. And he made his own beers with these hops, and he started showing them around, and finally got CLS Farms out in Yakima to show interest, and Sierra Nevada actually made the first beer with these hops. Now there has been Medusa, beer made with Medusa hops, and the most famous is Zappa hops, which there's plenty of beers made with Zappa hops. At the end here, I'm going to do a little bit of a photo collage of Todd and some of the beers that have been made. There was even a Todd Bates beer in homage to him. Unfortunately, Todd left us and passed on New Year's Eve in 2023, but we kept in touch over the years. I plan on doing a little type of a 20 questions interview, maybe a live with Todd. So I talked to him on a couple occasions, both on the phone and many times in Messenger, texting back and forth. So Todd did give me permission to use any photos on his Facebook page when I was going to do the report, and he sent me the one picture, but he said, hey, use any you want. So I'm going to put a little collage together here of pictures of Todd, pictures of some of the beers that have been made with originally Todd's hops. And one last thing I'll mention about Todd and NEO-1 hops. And in my notes on one of our phone conversations, I was always taking notes. He mentioned to me that NEO-1 was originally named A1105. So why would you give it a code name if it's actually a wild hop like Amalia, which he found? It was always named Amalia. And A1105 was the first breeding of Amalia. And if I recall, it was seed 11, cross 5, or vice versa. Cross 11, seed 5, but the A stands for Amalia as being its mother. So NEO-1 was Todd's creation. Thank you, Todd. We'll see you in hop heaven someday. Okay, back to the oils of NEO-1 hops. We have all the tests here. Before I talk about the oils, let's talk about production, because we did measure and dry all the plant, and on scale, if you scale it up, we actually got 0.99 pounds of dried hops from that one plant, which will be 990 pounds per acre. You say 1,000 pounds per acre on a plant that only grew 5 feet tall. Scale that up 10 feet, even on a short trellis, 8 or 9 feet, seems like a viable option as a commercial variety. I'd like to see somebody try it someday. So it was 3.96 pounds fresh, 0.99 pounds dried, 1,000 pounds per acre. Bam. One thing that Zach, the owner of the lab, told me right away before I told him what variety it was, he said it really looks like a wild hop. Well, now we know it's, let's call it semi-wild. It was created with 2 wild varieties. Now, the oils. Alpha acids, as we tested, 7.91%, which is right in the middle of what's published out there. Beta acids, really interesting, 6.32%, which is almost double where everybody published from 3 to 3.3%. That was kind of interesting. So, this thing about the linolone, let's see, limonene and linalool, okay? Every publication, except for Great Lake hops, has the fact that this variety is very resistant to pests because of the high levels of these 2 oils. According to Zach, the limonene is not high at all at 1.06 milligrams per 100 grams. And the linalool is medium high, not really high where you would say, yeah, that's the reason why they're resistant to pests. Now, one thing I can guarantee you, NEO-1 is highly resistant to groundhog. Aye, aye, aye. Couple other things Josh mentions, that this hops, of all the hops he's tested, is extremely unique. Why? Because the geraniol is among the highest that he's ever tested with super low humulin. He said that's only occurs in Comet and a few other hops. But the high levels of geraniol, if you look 2.27%, where the normal would be 0.01 to 0.5. You got 5.5 times the normal maximum. And this really makes it a fruit forward. That's why you have that citrusy, lemon, orangey flavor that comes from this hops. And he also mentioned this is very similar to Aztec hops. And I mentioned Aztec hops earlier. It turns out that Aztec is the daughter of Amalia. I did speak to one of the head guys over there at Great Lake Hops this past week, out of coincidence, and I asked him if it was NEO-1, but it is Amalia. Now, if we look at the spider graph for the aromas, look at that graph. Citrus, ba-bam, 10. What else? Citrus, citrus, citrus. Fruit, 1. Floral, 1. Herbal, 1. Earthy, 1. Spicy, 1. Citrus, ba-bam. So we'll show all these results here at the very end. Like we always do in every video, we show the cones and the leaves for identification purposes. We'll actually show the results of these tests. Thanks again, Zach. Thanks again, AAR Labs. We'll also show you now a little photo collage. Thanks again, Todd Bates. Thanks again, Neo-Mexican Hops. Hope you loved our video this week. We'll see you again next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Cheers to life.